medium residential district for a certain parcel of land lying and being in Lewis and Rehoboth Hundred, Sussex County, containing 43.77 acres, more or less. The property is lying on the southeast side of Kings Highway, which is Route 9, and on the north side of Gills Neck Road, which is Sussex County Route 267. The 911 address is not available, and the tax parcel ID is District 335, Map 8, Parcel 37.00, and staff would note it's a portion of. Application CZ1968 is an ordinance to amend the comprehensive zoning map of Sussex County from an AR1 agricultural residential district to a C2 medium commercial district for a certain parcel of land lying and being in Lewis and Rehoboth Hundred, Sussex County, containing 3.041 acres, more or less. The property is also lying on the north side of Gills Neck Road, which is Sussex County Route 267, approximately 329 feet southeast of Kings Highway, which is Route 9. The 911 address is not available, and the tax parcel ID is District 335, Map 8, Parcel 37.00. Staff notes a portion of. An application CU 2334 is an ordinance to grant a conditional use of land in an MR medium residential district for multi-family 267 units to be located on a certain parcel of land lying and being in Lewis and Rehoboth Hundred, Sussex County, containing 43.77 acres, more or less. The property is lying on the southeast side of Kings Highway, which is Route 9, and on the north side of Gills Neck Road, which is Sussex County Route 267. The 911 address is not available, and the tax parcel ID is District 335, Map 8, Parcel 37.00. The staff would note it's a portion of. Mr. President, submitted into the record for all three applications is a copy of the applicant's site plan and the applicant's exhibit booklets. We have a copy of the applicant's traffic impact study and the DELDOT response to this. We have a copy of the letters that have been received from the Sussex County Engineering Department Utility Planning Division. We have a copy of the PLUS comments and the applicant's response to the PLUS comments. We have the cultural resource assessment from the applicant and the environmental assessment from the applicant. And we've received for all three applications 6 letters in support, 6 letters in opposition, 4 comment letters and 4 mail returns. Those additional comments, Mr. President, that were received after 4:30 yesterday afternoon have or should have been circulated before you. And all three applications were subject to a public hearing before the Planning and Zoning Commission at its meeting of March 10th of this year. And at its meeting of March 10th of this year, the Commission recommended approval of CZ19. Hang on, bear with me. Just get the date. Apologies, Mr. President. Let's start one more time. The three applications were subject to a public hearing before the Planning and Zoning Commission at March 10th of this year, and at its meeting of April 14th of this year, the Commission recommended approval of CZ 1967 for the 7 reasons outlined in the motion, and the Commission recommended approval of CZ 1968 for the 7 reasons outlined in the motion, and at the same meeting, the Commission recommended approval of CU 2334 for the 12 reasons and subject to the 18 recommended conditions as outlined in the motion. And, Mr. President, copies of all of those draft motions and the minutes for those meetings are included in your paperless packets, plural. So, thank you.
Any questions from Council? If not, Mr. Hutt, are you going to read what you did Thursday night also into the record like a past applicant?
I will not.
I was going to say, would it be as short?
And I will forewarn you that it is not we are not nearly as short for this application and presentation as the last hearing was. For the record, my name is David Hutt. I'm a local attorney here in Georgetown with the law firm of Morris James. This afternoon, I'm representing both the ownership of the property, which is Mitchell Family LLC, as well as the applicant for the 3 applications that Mr. Whitehouse just introduced, Henlopen Properties LLC. With me this afternoon, and Mr. Moore, this is one of the reasons why it won't be as short as the last one. As you can see, I brought a team of people with me to assist in this process. But sitting in the back, on my left, your right, are Bob Mitchell and Jerry Mitchell, and those are 2 of the Mitchell family members and part of Mitchell Family LLC, the ownership group for the property. Sitting in the second and third row is John Myers and John Hoffman, who are representative of Henlopen Properties LLC, the development group. Sitting on the front next to me a moment ago is a familiar face to you, Ring Lardner, a professional engineer with Davis, Bowen and Friedel, who is the civil engineer for the project. All the way in the back is DJ Hughes, a professional engineer also with Davis, Bowen and Friedel, and the traffic engineer for this project. Sitting in the second row is Stephen Cahill, a professional geologist with Verdantis, who prepared the environmental assessment report that Mr. Whitehouse referenced a moment ago. And then sitting also in the second row is another familiar face to you, and that is Mark Davidson, the principal land planner with the Pannoni Group, who did a peer review of the various land use elements on behalf of the developer. First, thank you for agreeing to consolidate these applications into one public hearing so that everything that's said for one of these hearings will certainly apply to all three of the hearings. As you can see or read from the volume of material in the two-volume exhibit notebooks that were handed out as part of this, there's been a great deal of careful planning and thought that went into this project and these applications. In addition, there are a number of professionals. I just introduced a number of them, but there's certainly a number of other professionals in each of those various offices and other offices who participated in that careful planning, preparation, and review. As you just heard, there was a peer review conducted of this project. I note this because the information that's in that project booklet and the presentation that you'll hear from me and from Mr. Lardner and then from Mr. Cahill as well are not items that are speculation. They're not just opinions of what the law would refer to as lay people. These are people who are licensed professionals in their various fields. And what that says, according to the law, is that what they say is entitled to greater weight than someone who simply stands up here and has an opinion about something and says, I don't like this because of X or Y. And their focus and task of those professionals and engineers is, of course, within their various fields, is to make sure that what's presented is in compliance with the code, whether that be the county's code or any other code that is applicable to the project, as well as, of course, looking at the overall land use plan, both through the state process as well as the county's process. Certainly my comment is not intended to be disrespectful in any way to anyone who's here this afternoon to participate in this process, but instead I wanted to note that some things require professional expertise and specific details. Things like traffic analysis, stormwater management, and even source water protection. As Council is aware, there is a wellhead protection area that we will be talking about later this afternoon, and those are all things that require a certain amount of special expertise. And the wellhead protection area is a good, quick example that I can give of that. In some of the letters that Mr. Whitehouse referenced a moment ago that are found in the file, there are statements about these applications, quote unquote, preventing recharge and polluting water with runoff in a wellhead protection area. Certainly everyone can appreciate protecting a vital resource like drinking water, and that's why there is Chapter 89 in the Sussex County Code. But that's also why you will hear this afternoon from not only the professional engineer for the project, who did all the civil engineering for it, and Mr. Lardner, but you will also hear from our professional geologist, Mr. Cahill, that not only will the project readily comply with all the requirements found in the Sussex County Code in Chapter 89 of the Source Water Protection section of the code, but there will also be additional benefits to this wellhead protection area, and that will include additional recharge to this area, as well as filtering any runoff that is on the site, something that has not, of course, occurred historically on this, what's an open farm field, and certainly doesn't even occur today on the property. I wanted to begin this afternoon with a history and overview of the applications that are in front of you. And then partway through, I will ask Mr. Lardner to discuss the design, the site plan, and some of the more technical aspects of these applications. During Mr. Lardner's presentation, Mr. Cahill will also present specific information about the wellhead protection area, and then I will return to summarize this project's compliance with the county's comprehensive plan, its zoning code, and its consistency with the area. I mentioned this at the Planning Commission, but those are the two themes that will dominate the presentation this afternoon. And those two themes are this these plans compliance with the code and the comprehensive plan, and also the consistency of these plans with the character of the area here on the outskirts of Lewis. In addition to that compliance and consistency, you will hear this afternoon about how particular attention was paid to a number of details, some details that you often or don't often hear during presentations like this, and some enhancements that were proposed and then accepted, including interim improvements for traffic safety, as well as enhancing the architecture and landscape along Kings Highway, which, as you know, is a byway within the state of Delaware. I'm sure that most of you this afternoon know that these are not the applications that we're here on, are not the first set of applications that were filed for this project. The first applications were for a site plan that looked like this. Those were filed in April of 2019, and it was then known as the Mitchell Farm or Swannondale Farm, and that required 5 applications. There was a number of properties that were going to be zoned C3, heavy commercial, 2 properties that were going to be zoned B2, which is a neighborhood business district, and then an MR application, a conditional use application for multifamily use, and then a major subdivision to create all of those various component parts. After those applications were filed and throughout the process, a new developer came, and those processes were refined. And throughout that time, whether it was with the initial applications that were filed in April of 2019 and then the subsequent applications, I have been in fairly close contact originally with Ms. Cornwell about the scheduling of the public hearings for these applications. And then after Mr. Whitehouse took the helm, I've been in fairly regular contact with him, as I believe these are the longest outstanding applications that he has on his land use process docket. Of course, during those conversations, the single most important thing that was needed was the traffic impact study review letter from DelDOT under the county's memorandum of understanding with DelDOT. In order to have public hearings that required a traffic impact study, that review letter is a necessary item. And that traffic impact study review letter was received this past October of 2021. And then just a few weeks ago, actually probably a little more than a month ago now, there was a supplemental traffic impact study review letter that reflected the changed site plan. So the site plan changed from the one I showed you a moment ago with the 5 applications to what you're going to see this afternoon. And as was stated in that supplemental TIS review letter, the applications that you are considering this afternoon, and this is a quote from DelDOT's letter, that this represents a trip generation reduction of approximately 50% from those original applications. And you will hear in a moment from Mr. Lardner that the same improvements, traffic improvements, are going to be made, and in fact, as he will describe the interim improvements. And so the developer did not seek to lessen its improvements and its contributions to project based on the reduced number of traffic, but agreed to comply with the requirements of the initial traffic impact study review letter, despite the traffic reduction, trip generation reduction of 50%. Certainly the location of this property needs no introduction to all of you who are familiar with Sussex County, but briefly I did want to review the area. The image on the screen shows an overlay and rendering of this site inserted on the property itself. And one of the reasons that the site needs no introduction is, of course, because it is directly across the street from the Cape Henlopen High School. And whether you've been there for school-related purposes or an athletic event or other academic reason, most people have been to the Cape Henlopen High School or at least driven past it. Of course, there's also many community events that occur there. I know a couple years ago, I enjoyed watching, along with my children, Mr. Hudson play basketball at an event at the Cape Henlopen High School gym.
That was a sight, wasn't it?
You didn't pay for that, did you?
It was it was a good game. But staying on the same side of the highway as the high school, adjacent to the high school, is the Jack Lingo Realtor office. As you continue towards the city of Lewis, there is, of course, Henlopen Gardens. If you drive past there right now, you will see that the Lewis Medical Campus, which is an assisted living facility, is presently under construction. And then, of course, as you move in towards the city of Lewis, there is a strip shopping center there where Mr. P's Pizza is, and other various businesses as you head in that direction. Crossing over Kings Highway at the intersection with Gills Neck Road, there is the Future Village Center, a commercial application that land was rezoned several years ago, and I believe there's a site plan that is imminent. In March of 2018, jumping over Gills Neck Road, Council approved conditional use number 2112, which is now known as the Cape Henlopen Medical Center, which has a number of doctors' offices located in it. If you've ever driven past the Cape Henlopen Medical Center, you would see that it definitely shows the need for professional office space in this area, as from the time it opens in the morning, when I drive past there and see it, the parking lot is full, and as I understand it, that parking lot is full throughout the day at all times. Continuing on the same side of the highway, you have the site itself. Immediately adjacent to the site is Lane Builders, a local builder in the Lewis area. And next to Lane Builders is the Big Oyster Restaurant and Brewery. And there have been a number of change of zone applications that council has seen regarding Big Oyster as it expanded its property into this site. And in fact, there will be another change of zone application that council will see here in the next couple of weeks for that property. As you circle around the property, there is Jefferson Apartments, which is located within the city of Lewis and is a multifamily community. And adjacent to that is Bay Breeze Estates, which is a single-family community that's also located within the city of Lewis. And of course, to the east of the property, as you can see here, is the Moorings, which was formerly known as Cadbury, another senior care and assisted living facility. With that orientation to the overall area, I wanted to review a little bit of the history of the property as part of this. When Mr. Whitehouse introduced it, he referenced that there was a cultural resource assessment, which is essentially a history of the property prepared by Dr. Ed Otter. And that report is part of the project book. And if you've read it or looked at it, it does provide a fascinating history of this area of Lewis, not just this site, but the entire area. And you will see that over the various years and through various projects, this area has been thoroughly studied. And the most significant cultural resources are along Pothook Creek, which is in this area. And the further you get away from the water source, the less cultural resources that there are. The report from Dr. Otter indicated that the primary cultural resource that remains on the property is a farmhouse in this general area. And that farmhouse is actually still used. One of the individuals that I referenced earlier, Jerry Mitchell, who's sitting in the back, still resides in that home. As set forth in Dr. Otter's report, as well as the deed history, and there was a lengthy section showing the recorded history for this property. The Mitchell family, through various generations, has owned this property since the 1800s. If you were looking for the name to start with in Dr. Otter's report, it would be George Robinson. At that time, the property was about 58 acres, and it was farmed. And as most of you know, the property has continued to be farmed throughout that time period from then until now, and was even within an agricultural preservation district for a period of time. With the development of the area as is shown on this rendering. Farming has become more and more difficult, and as the village center gets developed and as the images you see here are for governors, as those are developed, this property becomes orphaned farmland that is difficult to get agricultural equipment to and from and to farm, and the family made the decision to sell the property. There were several neighbors who became interested in the property, and this shows the original, basically the original 58 acres that was part of the property, and all the various colored portions that you see on the screen are all out conveyances. The blue area was conveyed to what then was called Cadbury and is now the Moorings, as they wanted to expand be able to expand their assisted living facility in that direction. The green area here was the first conveyance to Big Oyster, and that has already been rezoned. The red area is a second conveyance that occurred more recently to the Big Oyster and is the subject of an upcoming change of zone application. And then the purple area here in the bottom corner is the Cape Henlopen Medical Center that I referenced a few moments ago from conditional use 2112 that was approved several years ago and has been constructed and built and is operational. After all of those conveyances, the property that remains, or the unshaded area in the middle that you see, consists of approximately 47 acres of land. And as the applications were introduced by Mr. Whitehouse, there are 3 applications in front of you. A change of zone for approximately 3 acres, seeking to change the zoning designation to C2, medium commercial, and then a change of zone application for the balance of the property, approximately 44 acres, seeking a designation of MR, or medium density residential, and then a conditional use seeking approval of a multifamily use of those 44 acres of MR zoning, for which that MR zoning designation was being sought. To help orient everyone to the zoning classifications for the property, this is a zoning map that shows both the county zoning as well as the zoning classifications within the city of Lewis. While the property is presently shown in this yellow color, which is MR, that is, of course, the proposed zoning, just as the shading or coloring here is the proposed commercial designation of C2, and the same is true of the third piece of Big Oyster. That is what is proposed for that piece, which is C3. All of the remaining color that you see on that zoning map are, in fact, from the zoning map. As you can see, this is the B1 neighborhood business area, which is the future village center immediately across Gills Neck Road from the property. This area right here, which is unshaded, does have that conditional use for Cape Henlopen Medical Center, and that building is 39,000 square feet of medical and office use. The Big Oyster parcel, as it begins along Kings Highway, you can see the red color, which is the county C1, and because that was a closed district, when additional land was added to it, it came in as C3, and then there is an application pending, a change of zone for the balance of that land to also become C3. Within the city of Lewis, the red checkerboard that you see there is R5 zoning, which is the city of Lewis's mixed residential area. Continuing on that north side, this yellow color is not MR in the county. That is within the city of Lewis, and that yellow color is R2, which is residential low density. The blue color immediately across the street from the property is also within the city of Lewis, and that is zoned CFHC, which is Community Facilities Healthcare, and that is the site of that senior living campus that is currently under construction. And then the other part of that project, as you can see, is more a general commercial, along the corridor of Kings Highway, and that red is the same whether it's in the county or the city, that it is commercially zoned properties. With that review of the location and then a little history and the surrounding zoning, at this time I'm going to ask Mr. Lardner if he would review the application's compliance with the Sussex County Code and a number of engineering details by describing the site plan and some technical features.
Thank you, Mr. Hood. Good afternoon, Mr. President, members of council. My name is Ring Lardner, a principal professional engineer with the firm Davis, Bone & Friedel. As Mr. Hood had mentioned, the total parcel of land is 46.81 acres. After the various activations were described, this C2 zoning on this rendering is this piece of land here, which we're requesting for a professional office building, which is about 3.04 acres more or less. It is located along Kings Highway. Kings Highway is classified as an other principal arterial per the Delta functional classification map, and furthermore is identified as a major arterial roadway per number 7 of the definition found in Chapter 115, Section 4 of the County Code. The remaining portion of land is 43.77 acres and subject to the other two applications. That portion of land has frontage along Kings Highway as well as frontage along Gills Neck Road. Gills Neck Road is classified as a local road per the DOT functional classification map. The layout of the site first began with a 20-foot forested buffer along the moorings, Baybreeze, and then Jefferson Apartments. Then on top of that, we provided additional open area behind that for drainage and landscaping, or for drainage, so that we had drainage between the buffer and the homes. That established the rear lot lines for the townhouses and the duplexes. The next area we looked at was the existing entrance on Gills Neck Road. As Mr. Hope mentioned, that entrance is currently open and being utilized by the Cape and Henlopen Medical Center. Developer wanted to do more residential, and as such also wanted to move away from the grid street that you saw in the original application that Mr. Hood mentioned. In doing so, we were able to actually create a curved entrance to come into the project that will utilize, again, the existing entrance as well as the existing access road that is serving Cape Henlopen Medical Center and will be jointly used by the professional office building. After that, we began to look at how best to interconnect with Big Oyster. As the landowner, developer, and Big Oyster have worked together for years on land acquisitions and interconnectivity, and that can be seen through all the applications that have been submitted. And the goal was always to separate the commercial traffic, and that's both Big Oyster as well as Cape Henlopen Medical Center, from the residential traffic. And in doing so, in this area, we were able to create a roundabout, a mini roundabout in this area that will minimize commercial traffic from interacting with residential traffic. And that mini roundabout will be designed so that all types of vehicles can navigate the circle and will be reviewed and approved by the Office of State Fire Marshal as well as Sussex County Engineering, so that, again, larger vehicles and or emergency vehicles can navigate the mini roundabout. Once these spots were all complete, we were then able to work on a land plan that offered a mixture of duplexes. Duplexes are more back here towards the moorings of Baybreeze, as well as two different townhouse product types. There will be some 3-story product types here along Kings Highway, with the remaining townhouses being 2-story product types. The internal roads will be designed to Sussex County standards, and the right-of-way within those roadways have been narrowed to allow the houses to be closer to the road or provide the parking spaces needed between the sidewalk and the front of the house, so that you get the house a little bit closer to the front streets, kind of get more of a streetscape feel to the project. All the houses were designed to provide 2-car garages, so that in essence, every lot will have the ability to park 4 cars. 2 in the driveway, 2 in the driveway. That's for the duplexes. The small townhouses, and the larger townhouse split product. In addition, No parking signs will be added to prevent on-street parking. As we know, on-street parking is a concern of the emergency apparatus. So that's why we have increased the interior parking to allow more cars to be within the residential units, so the on-street parking is not required. All lots were designed so that no lots are back-to-back. So you look through here, all the lots have open space between the lot lines. That open area will be used again for drainage and some other features, so not on the property lines. Sidewalks will be provided on both sides of the street, except for Road C, of which sidewalk will be located on one side of the road. The shared use path, which will be installed as part of our project, will provide the actual pedestrian connectivity on that side of the roadway. So in theory, there's sidewalks on both sides, just want to be a much wider shared use path. And we will have two connection points to the shared use path, one connection point being at the entrance, and one connection point being down here by the townhouse units. Active amenities include a dog park, a mail center, a community center, a pool, sports court, playground. That is located in this area here. The dog park will be located over in this area of the community. And some additional walking paths will be installed to promote pedestrian connectivity and walkability throughout the site. Stormwater management will be provided through infiltration. That is some of the grass swales located between the units. Perforated pipes within the roadway to help infiltrate the rainwater at the source. And then infiltration ponds, with the primary pond being located in this area here behind Cape Henlopen Medical Center. Any higher volume storm, and by that I refer to what's more commonly known as the 10-year storm event and 100-year storm event, will be discharged through an existing drainage pipe that's located across Gills Neck Road. Will proceed through lands owned by J.G. Townsend, and will discharge into Pot Hook Creek, which is a tidal discharge for the project. The stormwater was previously approved by Sussex Conservation District, so they have approved to this methodology, that stormwater is permitted to discharge through J.G. Townsend, and that approval is within the booklets. The location for the primary infiltration pond was chosen here. As we have found during the initial development of this project, the infiltration rates are much higher than what we originally expected. And as I noted, there's an existing 30-inch stormwater pipe available for an outfall, so that it will minimally disrupt the existing Cape Henlopen Medical Center and the visitors for that area. The project does not contain wetlands or floodplains on the site as depicted here on the environmental map. During the Plus review, the State Historic Preservation Office provided some information regarding known archaeological sites, known prehistoric sites, and some high potential resources due to known historic sites. As Mr. Hutt mentioned, we hired Dr. Ed Otter to complete a cultural resource assessment. That can be found in Exhibit R. He noted that the sites were actually not located in this project site, located either on other lands, but not within this project site, and that any existing building proposed to be demolished, he will be hired to document the structures prior to demolition as required by the state, or requested by the State Historic Preservation Office. That's the floodplain map. And this map here depicts source water protection area map. We'll note that the solid color here on the right-hand side, that is the excellent recharge area. And the red hatch here with the slash lines through it, that is the wellhead protection area. So this project is located within the wellhead protection area only, and therefore must comply with Chapter 89 of the Sussex County Code. At this time, I will turn the presentation over to Mr. Steve Cahill, who is a professional geologist for Dantas, to describe the project compliance with Chapter 89 of the Sussex County Code. And we also wanted to note for the record that Mr. Cahill did prepare a supplemental to the environmental assessment report, which I will hand out to the council right now, and we'll also provide a copy to BPW, as I know they're interested in the wellhead protection area.
Mr. President, can I ask a
Yes, sir,
question
Mr.
about the
Baker, you
site
can.
plan prior to getting into the
Sure.
wellhead issues?
Yes, sir.
Are you able to bring that site plan back?
Yes, sir.
Can you blow up that mini roundabout?
Yes, sir.
So obviously, as land use planning has evolved over the past few years, it's a good idea to require and ask for interconnectivity, particularly for bicycle and pedestrian.
Yes, sir.
And that will allow that into the adjoining Big Oyster property.
That's the access to the Big Oyster property, yes, sir.
But I think it's important to understand, as I read the material, unfortunately, when Bay Breeze and Cadbury were designed and developed and approved, for whatever reason, I'm not faulting anyone, there was really no consideration to given to future interconnectivity of the vacant properties adjoining them.
Yes, sir.
So there's obviously no ability for you as the applicant to provide that because you don't own the property next door. Is that a fair statement?
That is correct, and the property next door to us is already developed, so Bay Breeze has already been built out, as well as Jefferson Apartments.
So I would suspect that if you had the ability, you would offer interconnectivity, but you don't have that ability in today's world because they're already approved, built, and completely developed.
Yes, sir, that is correct.
You mentioned landscaping and the proposed taking when Kings Highway is redeveloped by DelDOT. How much land is the applicant actually giving up along Kings Highway?
Mr. Schaefer, I never, if you wouldn't mind, I was going to get into the whole traffic part when Mr. Cahill was done, and I'll be able to explain it and probably will answer most of your questions regarding that question. And anything dealing with traffic, I should be able to answer all that when I come back to my presentation.
Okay, that's fine.
Can I tag on it, specific to that mini roundabout?
Yes, sir.
Would that give any access to Big Oyster's trucks or larger vehicles? Would be adequate to, and would they be permitted?
This entrance is not designed for Big Oyster's truck traffic. That would use their main entrance that they have for their project. This was more designed for, as Big Oyster expands the back, more for their patrons to use this type of entrance, not really designed for a commercial entrance for Big Oyster. Could the truck navigate it? Yes, but it's not designed to do that. And that's somewhat of a discussion they've probably held between this developer and Mr. Hamer, that the truck traffic would not utilize this access at all. They would use their primary access off of Kings Highway. This time, Mr. Cahill.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. My name is Steve Cahill. I work for Veridentis. I've been a professional geologist for about 36 years now in Delaware. And of course, part of the task when you're in a wellhead area is to prepare an environmental assessment report. And two of the main goals, of course, is to make sure you're able to match or exceed the amount of water that's infiltrating into the ground. And the other, of course, is to minimize the impact on the resource. So the first thing I want to talk about is the recharge and water quantity. There's often a misperception or conception that anytime you develop a site, you're going to reduce recharge into the ground. And that's not always the case, and not the case for this project. When you look at the pre-development recharge, it was an agricultural field. You get precipitation, you get a certain amount of evapotranspiration uptake from the crops, you get runoff, and so forth. Now, if you're to develop the site, put a lot of impervious cover, and just let it run off the site, of course you're going to lose recharge. But if you can take that impervious cover, collect all the water from it, and recharge it into the ground on the site, you gain a lot of water because you don't lose the water that goes to evapotranspiration to the plants or the runoff that would typically occur. So in redoing the budget and the supplemental analysis, the pre-development recharge, this is just within the recharge area, or the wellhead area, of the project site. About 2.8 million gallons goes into the ground. And post-development, by collecting all the water from the impervious cover and taking it into this basin and into the ground, we're actually looking at a surplus of almost 4 million gallons per year going into the wellhead area. And the other thing to note is, of course, by controlling all this water, you're going to reduce the runoff from the site substantially. Also, stormwater from other areas of the project can be brought to this basin and really substantially increase the amount of water that's brought into this wellhead area. And I think that's something that's a little bit overlooked at the benefit of this, where millions and millions of gallons of water can be added to this wellhead area. And, the city of Lewis is rightfully worried about quantity and quality. And this is something to maybe consider and take a look at, the fact that we can put millions of gallons of water into this wellhead area for the city of Lewis. Okay, change in land use and water quality. This map, I just wanted to show the direction of natural topography and groundwater flow. The blue arrows kind of show where surface water naturally wants to go and where groundwater likely follows, as it typically mirrors your topography. And for the most part, we have water heading up to the northwest towards Canary Creek and kind of to the north and northeast towards the Lewis and Rehoboth canals. Another misperception is that developing a site, you're automatically going to degrade surface water, you're going to degrade groundwater. And again, with the best management technologies and the requirements that come along, in these, these water resource protection areas, there are a lot of technologies that actually help. So, in this case, we're going from agriculture where you have sheet flow of stormwater off an agricultural field, and you're going to green technology, best management practices. You're going to control the stormwater runoff. You're going to slow it down. You're going to reduce it. You're going to reduce soil erosion, and you're going to reduce nutrient loading that you would see from agricultural practices, your nitrogen, phosphorus, pesticides, herbicides, and so forth. There's also a thought that if you develop a site, whether it's residential, commercial, you're automatically going to endanger these wells. But if you drive up and down Delaware, you see supply wells, you see residential areas, you see commercial properties, they have supply wells. And they're not, I've never in my years had a situation where the well had to be replaced or had a filter system put on due to a parking lot or a commercial building. There are certain things associated with them that we'll talk about later that won't be included in this project. But when you just look at a commercial development or a residential development, I've never seen a situation like that. And if you want to look at an example of a wellhead area that has a lot of residential use, commercial use, look at the Lewis wellhead area. There are over 200 homes within this area. A lot of them were served by septic systems for some time. Kings Highway runs directly adjacent to the well field. There's 10 to 12,000 vehicles a day. And of course, Cape Henlopen High School. I do want to get a little bit into detail on Cape Henlopen because it's just a good example of what can be near a well field and not impact it. They have over 1 million square feet of impervious cover. They have over 600 parking spaces. They have bus parking. They have a large above-ground storage tank, diesel fuel. They have a greenhouse, a large maintenance building. And all those are located up on that north end of the arrow, and they actually drain into their recharge basin over there. And I'm just guessing, when school's in and all the other activities, they probably see at least 50,000, 100,000 vehicles in those parking lots per year. And the Lewis water quality has been fine to our knowledge. So I think it's a good perspective that, these kind of land uses don't typically impact supply wells. There are other things that certainly do. And just noting a few, just in all the years of my work, these are the ones that I typically see: underground storage tanks, manufacturing and industry, dry cleaning operations, agriculture, and poultry operations, none of which are planned for this project. Also, I wanted to note a study done for Newcastle County. Newcastle County was one of the first government agencies to actually get involved with water resource protection areas in their building codes. And they work closely with the University of Delaware and DENREC to actually generate the maps. And some of their projects had water management agreements where you actually had to monitor the groundwater before you developed and after you developed. So the Water Resources Agency for the University of Delaware did a study for Newcastle County and looked at a number of these projects. And I'll just read what they put on the cover page of that report, that groundwater quality and quantity have largely been preserved under the WRPA provisions of Newcastle County. And if you dig into the report, you'll see that most of the projects, the groundwater quality actually improved after development or remained unchanged. And I will note too that Newcastle County, they do permit recharge basins to accept both rooftop water and water from pavement, but they do like to see pretreatment structures like we're recommending here. I also wanted to note, this is for the Village Center in 2016. Someone from the Sussex County Planning and Zoning reached out to DENREC to ask them about the water quality for the Lewis supply wells. And the question was, has the purity of the water changed? And DENREC's response was based on the sample results for the last 5 to 10 years, available to DENREC by the Office of Drinking Water. There's been no change in water quality. And that's an important thing to note as you look at what's in the wellhead area now and what's being proposed. So, in summary, we have the ability to drastically increase the recharge of water in this wellhead, which I think is a very good benefit. We'll reduce the loading of nitrates, phosphorus, and other agricultural materials. And residential and commercial properties don't result in impacting supply wells. There are certain things associated with ones not with this project that can, like underground tanks, things like that. And the other thing I will note that the soil conditions and depth of groundwater are very good out there for taking recharge. And I think there's the ability to take a fair amount of water into the ground, keep the runoff down, supply more water to the city. Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir, Mr. Schaefer.
So it's your testimony that you're going to increase the recharge by approximately 4 million gallons?
That's just taking all the water from within the mapped portion of the wellhead area, yes.
So that's over and above what's being recharged into that area today?
About 4 million gallons more a year would go into the ground.
I heard you mention, and the city of Lewis was concerned about green infrastructure practices, preventing pollutants and so forth going into the stormwater pond and possibly infiltrating the water table. And I think I read in the packet, and I don't know if you discussed that in great detail or if you're going to do it later, I'll wait. But is not the applicant offering to put in a infiltration or a infiltration system to prevent pollutants from going into the stormwater pond?
I think what was being planned, and Ren can get into it more, is anything coming off the pavement would be going through a pretreatment structure, which is essentially almost like a dual chamber compartment that allows water underneath this baffle wall and collects debris, and if there's, say, an oil spill or something, into the first chamber.
So the applicant's offering to install that?
Correct.
Is that over and above what's required by code?
According to Mr. Lardner, yes. And that's typical in Newcastle County, too. I've done a lot of water resource protection area projects in Newcastle County. And it's not required by code, but it's kind of the standard practice. If you're going to take water from pavement, have this extra measure. So.
Okay, just I don't mean to repeat myself, but to be clear, because I want to make sure the city of Lewis's questions are answered appropriately. So I saw the DENREC study that you put up on the overhead about the quality of water in the area. And I've heard the testimony that it's your position that the quality will not be degraded at all. And you're also going to produce an additional 4 million gallons into the recharge area.
into the wellhead area, yes,
Okay.
correct,
All right,
based on the water budget analysis.
all right, thank you.
Thank you.
A couple of things to add to Mr. Cale's presentation. The pre-treatment overall is required for stormwater management. The pre-treatment structure that we're proposing to be installed is above and beyond what DENREC requires for regulations. So yes, we will be installing a pre-treatment structure that will handle not only what's called floatables, but also the hydrocarbons of concern from leaky vehicles and the like. And that is the glorious oil water separator, if you will, will be installed for stormwater purpose and designed for the flow rates that would be going into the system. There are other means of stormwater management. There's 42 plus tools in the toolbox, as we like to refer to as stormwater management. Some others that you may hear later on, and some that are referenced in the City of Lewis letter you saw, includes permeable pavement, porous pavement, dry wells, and the like. In this particular case, porous pavement, pervious pavement is not the appropriate stormwater practice in the case. I agree that it will infiltrate the stormwater, same as it will for the recharge basin we're proposing. However, porous pavement, pervious pavement, all the different classifications thereof, does not provide pre-treatment. So, for example, I could be in my house, I could work on the oil, change the oil in my car, I could drop the oil pan, it goes right to the pervious pavement, right down into the stone, right in the groundwater, whereas without...
So that's not going to allow you to capture any potential
Under
pollutants?
porous pavement, pervious pavement condition, that is true because there's no pre-treatment on that pavement. Furthermore, pervious pavement, porous pavement has a longer, more expensive maintenance requirements for those type of systems because you cannot sweep them. You have to vacuum the road in order to clean to keep their porous pavement open. So in actually installing roadways of that type, you actually burden the HOH with additional maintenance costs and perpetuity for those type of systems. So what we're proposing is our recharge basin with pre-treatment is actually a better solution than using porous pavement, permeable pavement in the roadways and the driveways of this community. Continuing on, the property is located within the Sussex County Unified Sewer District and will be served by gravity sewer system to the Governor's Pump Station. This property may be served with electric by both City of Lewis Board of Public Works and the Delaware Electric Cooperative, as this project is split served by both entities. Should this body grant approval, we will have to have further conversation with the Board of Public Works and Delaware Electric Co-op to figure out how we're going to split the territory so we don't have middle of houses and a split between what's getting served by BPW and the electric co-op. Water service, again, could also be provided by City of Lewis Board of Public Works or Tidewater Utilities. Both utilities have water along the property frontages. BPW has front water along Kings Highway. Tidewater has water along Gills Neck Road. Again, those will be further discussions, again, should this body elect to approve the project. We do have a willing and able letter from Tidewater to serve this project for both domestic and fire protection. And natural gas is available from Chesapeake Utilities. Exhibit Q contains some of the traffic items that we'll discuss. First, a traffic impact study was prepared by our office in November of 2019, and an addendum was prepared in April of 2020 for the previous applications that Mr. Oak mentioned that was withdrawn. And that previous application was for 206,500 square feet of medical office building, 60 single-family homes, and 150 multifamily homes. A TIS review letter for that project was prepared on October 7th, 2021 regarding that application. The improvements for that project include right-of-way dedication, interim improvements, and build-out improvements that were required. Subsequent to the review letter, the new plan currently being reviewed with you this afternoon was submitted to both Delta and Sussex County. As part of that submission, the developer stated that despite the reduction of traffic, as Mr. Hood mentioned, around 50%, the developer would abide by the recommendations from the original study. Delta, after review of that request and reduction of traffic, did not require a new traffic impact study because they've recognized that by doing those improvements, we are over mitigating our impact to that area. Furthermore, during that time, DelDOT sped up the design of what's known as the DelDOT US 9, Kings Highway, Dartmouth Drive to Freeman Highway, DelDOT contract T2022-1290 award, or what I'll refer to for the rest of this afternoon as the dualization of Kings Highway. The dualization of Kings Highway was first identified in 2009 as part of a larger agreement involving projects that have completed construction and their portion of the overall improvements. Those improvements including improving Gills Neck Road and Kings Highway, adding turn lanes on Kings Highway, Gills Neck Road, improving Gills Neck Road, extending the Junction Breakwater Trail. All that work has been done by the developers who are obligated to do so. The last remaining item is the dualization of Kings Highway. As this body is well aware, on February 23, 2022, DelDOT held a public workshop on the dualization project, of which they proposed widening Kings Highway to be dual lanes in both directions from Dartmouth Drive all the way up to the split in the city of Lewis. That also included 5 roundabouts, of which I will not get into the discussion of DelDOT's project. DelDOT was at first against interim improvements. They fought us quite a bit over installing interim improvements because they thought it was going to add cost and other issues to their project. But through the developers' willingness, more than willingness, desire to complete them, as it does provide temporary relief, DelDOT agreed to interim improvements, but slightly different than what was originally required. So furthermore, the revised TS letter changed some other requirements. I want to review all of the new requirements of what the traffic impact study requires. First, the developer will mill and overlay approximately 3,500 linear feet of Kings Highway. That will go from our entrance here at Kings Highway all the way down to the intersection of Clay Road and Kings Highway. The next improvement is
And that'll be pre-redevelopment of Kings Highway?
Redevelopment. We will be installing, sorry, the wrong one. This is the intersection of Gills Neck Road going on to Kings Highway. We will be converting what's currently now a through lane here. We will be converting that into a second left turn lane. So you will actually have 2 left turn lanes from Gills Neck Road onto Kings Highway. The existing right turn lane will be lengthened all the way back to our entrance, Gills Neck Road, and will be converted to a through right turn lane, and we'll be working with DelDOT on a bike lane as part of that improvements. So that will improve the traffic from Gills Neck Road heading into Route 1 and wherever they then go from there.
And that's also pre-redevelopment of Kings Highway?
All pre-redevelopment of Kings Highway. Starting a little bit west of what this image shows is where we will begin adding a second through lane through this corridor. So this cross-section here shows that we have the right turn lane going into the high school with the same length that currently exists today, a bike lane, 1 through lane, 2 through lanes, left turn lane. There'll still be the through lane going into the city of Lewis along with a 10-foot wide shoulder. So that begins the dualizing Kings Highway, leaving what I would say the ferry headed to Route 1. Coming at the other side of the intersection, what this shows is a 10-foot wide shoulder, a through lane, left turn lane into the high school, another through lane, bike lane, and the right turn lane. So as you can see through all these improvements, we're adding a second through lane from City of Lewis, headed out to Route 1, providing shoulders on both sides of the road, as well as a bike lane. The final improvement is this shared use path will be extended, because right now it stops at the school district office, if you're familiar with that corridor, we're extending that shared use path all the way down to Clay Road, so that you will have a shared use path from Clay Road all the way up to the high school. All of these improvements will be completed prior to DelDOT beginning their project. In addition, we are also providing an equitable contribution to the utilization of that project. So on top of all the improvements, we are also providing a cash payment. Not all cash, there is some right-of-way that's being credited, but fundamentally we're providing cash payment to DelDOT to help further fund this project. We are required to dedicate 50 foot of right-of-way from Center Line Road for Kings Highway. We're required to dedicate 30 feet of right-of-way from Gills Neck Road. On top of that, we're also required to reserve 30 feet of right-of-way along Kings Highway, and then on top of all that, a 15-foot PE on Kings Highway and Gills Neck Road. So fundamentally, this project will be reserving 80 feet of right-of-way plus 15 foot of PE on Kings Highway for the future utilization of the project. In addition, they will also be providing an equitable contribution to the Clay Road, Marsh Road re-improvement project, providing vehicle interconnection and cross-access easements between on-site lots, which we've talked about, as well as other bicycle, pedestrian, and transit improvements. The shared use path will be constructed, in this case, a more linear project, and will tie in the existing Cape Illen Medical Center. And I'll come back to discussing that piece here in just a minute. And again, all those improvements is all prior to DelDOT putting a shovel in the ground for all their improvements. And to further help illustrate it, don't mind the elevator. I think there's some music on here. I didn't listen to it yet. We'll provide an overall aerial view of exactly what our project looks like, along with all the interim improvements as I just previously described.
So, Ring, can I ask you a question? So those improvements will all meld with DelDOT's future redevelopment project?
Not a perfect build, but pretty close to it. All the improvements we're using, they will be able to reutilize. At least all the pavement, they'll be able to reutilize. The drainage they're going to have to fix on their own as they continue widening, because they're going to keep widening towards us. But all the pavement we're putting down, they should be able to reuse all of it. And we will be coordinating them through the design, because we have to coordinate this together, because it makes zero sense for us to design in a vacuum. So we will be working with them through this whole process.
And the applicant's giving up 85 feet?
80 feet of right-of-way.
80 feet? And
From
that
center line of road.
and that will allow for substantial buffer, landscape?
There won't be much of a landscape, because the shared use path will be right on top of that right-of-way with the shared use path. There'll be some buffering, but not to what was originally proper. There will be landscaping integrated with the shared use path, and we will coordinate that with the byways committee, as we've already met with them to discuss the project.
I couldn't see on the site plan, is the shared use path behind the landscaping or?
Within the landscaping.
Okay.
So you have trees on both sides, shrubs on both sides to get it to fit. We're trying to push the shared use path closer to Kings Highway to provide more of a buffer between the shared use path and our site. And again, these are just details we have to work out with DelDOT and the byways, again, should this project be allowed to move forward.
And when you talk about the melding of the road improvements, I would assume that shared use path in the future will tie into a future path further down Kings Highway going towards Route 1.
Yes, sir. So here's just an aerial view, just showing the improvements. You see the 2 lanes coming out of the city, the 1 lane going in, shoulders on both sides. This will be good. It's a turn lane, right lane. You saw the shared use path that was going down. And in this section, we can now see the 2 left turn lanes coming out. There's 2 door lines coming through here. This is where the dual lanes actually starts to taper and into the entrance. Show landscaping on both sides of the shared use path. Right in only on our entrance, as DelDOT's project will finish the roundabout entrance part of the whole project. So that's why we're only proposing a right in and a right out in the inner condition until DelDOT comes forward to put the final roundabout, which would become our entrance.
So I don't mean to throw you a curveball, but if you have 80 feet and then you have those units, they've got to be, they're at least 200 feet off the road, aren't they?
I didn't do the math, but they're pretty far off the road. Let me pull the plan up, Mr. Chairman.
Well, you have the 80 feet plus the road
So right
and the
here,
parking.
This townhouse unit itself will be 95 feet from center line of the road. So this will be about 50 foot from edge of, about 20, 25 foot from edge of pavement when it's all said and done.
Okay. I'm just curious because of the streetscape, what it's going to look like as you drive by.
Trying to make it as robust and as nice as we can, given the area we're in. But at the end of the day, data's going to dictate how much area is available for buffering, landscaping, and the like, and that's part of the discussion. Like I said, we've committed. DelDOT knows we have to work together and save the byways, and they're equally excited the fact that we want to work with them, as this is part of the Lewis Byway network.
Now, what does that plan do with the proposed swale design that DelDOT currently has in their proposed improvements?
We're going to install the swales because they currently exist today, but DelDOT's going to have to come redo that because, again, I don't know what their final configuration of where that edge of pave is going to be.
Well, hopefully they're going to do closed stormwater,
I
but
can't answer that question, Mr. Schaefer.
if they did do closed stormwater, that would give you the opportunity for maybe some enhanced.
Some additional enhancement, yes, sir. But it would change how they do their stormwater,
Yeah.
but again, that's a question for their design team.
Understand.
Talk about the byways. Okay, finally, before turning a presentation back to Mr. Hutt, there's certain code compliance items. The first is, again, we were reviewed by Plus on December 15th. A copy of their comments and our response can be found in Exhibit M. Again, their comments were general in nature, and the project will comply with all regulatory requirements. Our office prepared an environmental assessment public facility evaluation report that is separate what Verdantis did. That report was prepared in accordance with Chapter 115, Section 194.3 of the Sussex County Code. And again, the written response can be found in Exhibit K. The project has analyzed all aspects of the respective items, and all mitigation measures are consistent with the comprehensive plan.
Mr. Hutt, are you going to talk about traffic any further?
I am not.
Hate to lay this one on you, but what's the level of service at that intersection today? Do we know?
I can't tell you the exact level of the fact that it's failing.
Failing and then some.
And do you know what with the proposed improvements, what it would be?
Our
interim improvements?
Our interim improvements improve it to a satisfactory level of service during the AM, but the PM and the summer Saturday still fails, but the time is significantly less than what in the current existing condition does.
How about with the proposed redevelopment of the entire corridor?
Once DelDOT has finished their improvements, it does come to all satisfactory levels of service. My understanding, I haven't looked at the numbers, my understanding and talking to them is it does come to a satisfactory level of service when they're finished dualizing the highway.
So it'll be substantially improved?
Yes, sir. But our improvements does improve that corridor in the interim until DelDOT comes through.
Amy?
Just as a reminder, we do have Bill Brokenbrough from DelDOT joining us by telephone if there are questions for DelDOT.
Well, I trust that Mr. is giving us accurate information.
When I began, I spoke about the consistency of these applications with things like the comprehensive plan and the zoning code and the surrounding area. On the screens around the room right now, you see the county's 2045 future land use map that you're familiar with from Chapter 4 of the comprehensive plan. And as you can see the site, which has the rendering on it. If the rendering was not there, the site would be yellow in color, which, as the council knows, means that it's within the coastal area, one of the county's 7 growth areas. And you can see that all of this area, you have the city of Lewis, which is brown in color on this map, and then the surrounding area is all the coastal area, a growth area, or in the commercial area in the county's future land use map, which is, of course, another growth area. And as you know, Chapter 4 of the comprehensive plan contains a table that indicates what zoning districts are applicable to which categories on the future land use map. And Table 4.5-2 does indicate that both the C2 medium commercial district as well as the MR medium density residential district are appropriate zoning districts within the coastal area that you see. Specifically, when you then move from the comprehensive plan to the zoning code describes the C2 district, and the purpose for that district is, of course, how the zoning code begins. And it states that the district supports uses that include retail sales and performance of consumer services. It permits a variety of retail, professional, and services businesses. This district will be primarily located near arterial and collector streets. It accommodates community commercial uses that do not have outside storage or sales. And it is nice when something from the purpose of the zoning code matches exactly what's proposed for this site, because that is the vision for that use of a professional medical office building to serve the residents in the area. And in fact, you see a good example of that while it was a conditional use. But the Cape Henlopen Medical Center next door, if you were to repeat that on this site, would be of the same nature as that, and certainly fits the purpose of the C2 district. When I began, I mentioned that part of the planning, the detail of the planning of this, were things that are not always conventionally thought of. And one of those was that the developer hired an architect to go out and study the architecture in the area to decide and determine what type of architecture would be most suitable for their proposed office building. And I certainly recognize, and Mr. Moore is going to cringe, but the council does not participate in architectural reviews of projects. In fact, the Planning Commission does not participate in architectural reviews of projects. But I wanted to highlight that because it shows the analysis and the attention to detail that went into this. And at the end, we'll have the full rendering of the plan, and you'll see what the vision was of that architect. And in one of the letters of that commented on this that is in the file, they commented on the architectural style of the building. And the architect described the architecture in the area as follows, that there are numerous architectural motifs in the context that might be evoked to rationalize any architectural style. And I think what that means is that there's just a variety of architectural styles that exist out there. But the architect goes on, and this is within the project book, that his goal was to harmonize the architecture of those structures that were closest to it. So taking elements from the Cape Henlopen High School directly across the street, taking elements from the Cape Henlopen Medical Center, and putting those into a building, and that is the architectural design that is actually what would be built should this project receive favorable action from the council. And certainly while architectural features are not something that the county is in the business of reviewing, a concern of every zoning code and certainly of the council is the size or scale of the features of a property. And when you think of commercial uses, people always are talking about the scale of a commercial use. And so a study was done of the buildings in this area to determine what the size and scale was of various buildings. And immediately across the street, of course, you have the Cape Henlopen High School, which is around 367,000 square feet. The Lewis Senior Living Campus, which is also across the street and currently under construction, is 223,000 square feet of area. The moorings on the opposite side of this project, as you travel down Gills Neck Road, is 117,000 square feet inside. The future Village Center has a maximum capacity under the B1 zoning district of 75,000 square feet. And of course, our nearest neighbor would be the Cape Henlopen Medical Center building, which is 39,000 square feet. And thus the 43,000 square foot building certainly falls well within all of the various sizes and scales of the buildings that I just identified on the perimeter of this site and the project. And in fact, as I mentioned, it's smaller than every one of those buildings by a substantial amount, other than our immediate neighbor next door, to which it's very compatible and essentially the same size. When I read the purpose of the C2 zoning district, of course, in addition to describing the uses that are permitted, it talks about where that zoning classification should be located. And of course, it's stated that they should be primarily located near arterial and collector streets. And you heard from Mr. Lardner just a moment ago how Kings Highway is a perfect match, as it is a principal arterial, as that designation has been assigned to it by DELDOT. The other change of zone request, of course, is for about 43 acres of the site to be zoned MR, medium density residential, with a conditional use for the 267 units. And the same is true when you look at the purpose section of the MR district as it was of C2, as far as fitting this site and this area. The purpose of the MR district, according to the code, is to provide for medium density residential development in areas which are or which are expected to become generally urban in character, but where sanitary sewers and public water supplies may or may not be available at the time of construction. A multifamily use, as is proposed in this location with the townhomes and duplexes, is a conditional use. And conditional uses, as you know, are uses that are of a semi-public character and are essential and desirable for the general convenience and welfare. But because of their nature and the importance of the relationship to the comprehensive plan and possible impact not only on neighboring properties but a large section of the county, require the use and exercise of planning judgment on location and site plan. And as Council knows, you regularly see multifamily use applications in the MR zoning district. The purpose, as I mentioned, of this district is particularly situated for this site because it talks about areas which are or are expected to become urban in character. And that's an excellent description of the Kings Highway corridor. Starting with the Village Center project. Of course, there are many communities that exist along Gills Neck Road, but if you stay along Kings Highway, you would begin with the Village Center commercial site. Then you have a number of other commercial uses along that, from the Cape and Open Medical Center to Lane Builders to the Big Oyster. And the same is true on the opposite side of the street. And of course, the city of Lewis is nearby, which is urban in character in and of itself. In addition, of course, there are townhomes and duplexes or multifamily uses that exist along Gills Neck Road. They exist both within Governor's, Breakwater, as well as Admiral's Chase as you go a little further down Gills Neck Road. That same multifamily use exists directly behind the property in the moorings, formerly Cadbury, and of course across the street with respect to the future Lewis Senior Living Campus. And as this property abuts the city of Lewis, it's important to look at what the adjacent properties in the city of Lewis are. And frankly, those properties have that same character. Immediately to the north of this property is Jefferson Apartments, which of course is another multifamily use. And across the street, as I just mentioned ago, is Henlopen Gardens and Dutchman's Harvest, as well as that Lewis Senior Living Facility. The final property that is immediately adjacent to ours and lies within the city of Lewis is Bay Breeze Estates. And in the beginning, when I talked about the zoning of the areas, as you'll recall, that was a R2 district, which in Lewis is their low-density residential area. And interestingly enough, even though that's a low-density residential area, the density of that is still 3 units to the acre. With respect to surrounding densities, similar to the study that was done on the scale of the commercial building, a study was done to look at the various densities of projects in the area, and this is within the project book, but is also shown on the screen around the room. I'm going to highlight just a couple of them across the street, and this would be behind the Lewis Senior Medical Campus that's under construction. You have Dutchman's Harvest at 17.7 units per acre. The Jefferson Apartments, which is our immediate neighbor to the north, is at 9.8 units per acre. On this side of the property, along Gills Neck Road, the moorings is at 6.4 units per acre. Henlopen Gardens, immediately across the street, is at 5.5 units to the acre. And as I mentioned, Bay Breeze Estates is at 3 units to the acre. And this project falls right in line with that, being at approximately 6 units to the acre. Of course, oftentimes when you think of zoning maps, people just look at the eye test for zoning that is in the area. We reviewed the zoning classifications earlier, but as you can see, as far as what's in the immediate area, directly across the street from the proposed commercial area is commercial properties. You have commercial property in B1 that is located here, and so this area right here is, again, just visually looking at a zoning map within commercial areas. Similarly, with respect to the proposed MR district, as you can see, the property that is within the Sussex County or unincorporated areas of Sussex County is zoned MR, has that same zoning classification as being proposed, which is why, again, this project fits so neatly into this area. In addition, and this was part of the plan review that was conducted by Pannoni Associates, the layout that you see for this plan was done purposefully with good land use principles in mind, with the more intense uses, that is the commercial uses, and the more dense residential being located closer to Kings Highway. And as you travel further into the property in an easterly direction and come closer to the moorings or come closer to Bay Breeze Estates, those are less intense uses. And again, that's a part of the process here, was to design something in keeping with good land use principles and being mindful and respectful of the neighboring communities that exist. Of course, the surrounding communities and zoning districts are not the only consideration in the comprehensive plan. The description of the coastal area within Chapter 4 states that medium and higher densities, and in the county, of course, MR is typically 4 units to the acre. So medium and higher densities would be anything from 4 units to the acre and above, 4 to 12 units to the acre. But the comprehensive plan talks about when it's appropriate to have more than 4 units to the acre or a medium density. And there are a number of considerations, and Mr. Lardner already went over a number of those, but I'll highlight what those considerations are, and that include where there is central water and sewer. Mr. Lardner indicated that both of those exist for the property. The next consideration is when there's a significant number of commercial uses and employment centers. Certainly the city of Lewis is in close proximity. The entire Route 1 corridor is at the disposal of this site. So I don't think there could be really a location that has more employment centers and commercial uses within close proximity. The next characteristics is in keeping with the area. And certainly as we just have gone over with the scale of the building, the density of the building, and the adjacent zoning classifications, all of those things show and demonstrate that this proposed project is in keeping with the area. Another factor is that it be situated along a main road or at or near a major intersection. And of course, you've heard about that this is a major arterial, and you've heard about the traffic improvements, not only the interim improvements that are proposed by the developer, but of course the long-term improvements that DelDOT has. All of those things demonstrate the plan's compliance with the comprehensive plan for the county as well as the zoning code. And I'll circle back around just briefly to the traffic concern that was raised a moment ago, if I may, Mr. Schaefer. The traffic impact study that's included in the project book did show that there are a number of intersections along this corridor that have a failing level of service presently, and that the solution to that, the final solution, is DelDOT's dualization of Kings Highway. Waiting for those improvements would not be good for the community, and as you heard from Mr. Lardner, the developer and DelDOT agreed upon a set of interim improvements to improve things between now and when DelDOT completes that dualization. And again, Mr. Brokenbrow can comment on this, but with the dualization, that is when there's acceptable level of service in the area. I think the important thing here is that the memorandum of understanding between DelDOT and the county talks about specific instances where level of service D, which is what the county seeks to achieve through its memorandum with DelDOT, cannot always be achieved by a specific project. And in the memorandum of understanding, it states that, expressly states that level of service D is not always attainable. But more importantly, it states that the threshold of creating that level of service D may create an undue burden on a property owner looking to develop a property, given the prior development that has occurred in an area contributing to the existing level of service. And it goes on to state that, in essence, when that situation arises, where it's too expensive for the last project in town or the second to last project to have to pay for all these improvements, or second, that what can't happen is you can't degrade service. This project cannot degrade the level of service. And as you heard, with the interim improvements, in the interim, there will be an enhanced level of service, and then when the dualization occurs, of course, the level of service becomes acceptable.
On that issue, can I ask a question? And I appreciate your statement about the undue economic impact on the developer. But there are some that might say that they're not concerned with the economic impact on the developer. But I think I heard your engineer give testimony earlier that after the proposed redevelopment of Kings Highway, that the level of service will be enhanced dramatically. Did I hear that correctly?
Correct. With the DelDOT improvements, the level of service becomes acceptable.
I know that's
the
a few years down the road.
Within the interim improvements, there is a dramatic increase in the level of service, and at specific times, and Mr. Lardner or Mr. Hughes will scold me later, it's either the AM or the PM peak actually becomes a level of service D with the interim improvements. One of those becomes that, and the others all see a dramatic decrease in the length of wait time at those lights, which is how level of service is.
And the reason I repeat that again is I'm not trying to be gratuitous here. I'm trying to make sure that the people listening over the internet and in the community understand that the level of service will in fact be substantially improved during the period after development of the site and after the redevelopment of Kings Highway.
That is correct.
And this may be completely unrelated. I forgot to ask this question when Ring was up here. I was asked about transit stops, and my answer to that question was, well, that's really a DART call, whether or not they believe that the site requires a transit stop. I, for one, believe that, and this is not the politically correct thing to say in today's world, unfortunately for me, but I, for one, believe that density should be around municipalities and around urban areas where people can actually walk to work or bicycle to work and not have to take a vehicle out from the middle of a farm field out in the middle of the county and drive into work every day. But my answer relating to the transit stops was that that's really a DART call. But I think there's substantial right-of-way being given up by the applicant there that if DART did decide to build a transit hub there, they could certainly do that. So I just want people that are listening to hear that answer. And if I'm incorrect that that's not a DART decision, you can correct me. But I believe ultimately the applicant would not oppose a DART bus stop at that site.
That is correct. And the applicant, whether it's with respect to DART, whether it's with respect to landscaping, is going to be working closely, has worked closely already with DelDOT, and will continue to work closely with DelDOT on all those things, not only for the initial planning of entrances and off-site traffic improvements for this project, but of course as the dualization occurs, there's going to be a continuing conversation that occurs, whether it's for, earlier we were talking about the stormwater management for Kings Highway, but the same is true for DART and that service as well. So yes, there would be cooperation with that respect. And with respect to your comment about density being located, I believe, closer to urban areas, I believe that is consistent with your comprehensive plan. I think that is exactly what the comprehensive plan says. And with respect to that...
Can I jump in, tagging on to what Mark said? Because your comments imply, workforce housing might be a part of this. I mean, what is the projected price level of this? Are we anticipating this to be an affordable range for workforce housing?
These are market rate units. So with respect to as far as workforce, where you think of perhaps median income limits and such, it is not housing in that genre or thought process. But these are townhomes and duplexes, which are generally more affordable in these locations than the single-family homes with the larger properties and those types of things. So more affordable than a single-family home in the area, most likely, but not workforce housing. For instance, Dutchman's Harvest across the street is that is what it is intended to be, is workforce housing. And so it is not workforce housing in that sense.
But I think the price point of these units will be such that if you have a two-income household, for a police officer and the spouse works at the hospital, I think they could,
Well, that's what I'm wondering, what that price point is, because, I mean, our median household combined income is about $75,000, so I don't know if that type of person could afford to live there, because, I mean, obviously we have a shortage of housing for nurses and, teachers and so forth, and, and you're requesting additional density. I didn't know if in exchange there would be a consideration for including some workforce housing.
Again, I think the different size products, again, they'll begin with the smaller size townhomes, and I think those will begin in the 4s probably. And so as you get to the larger products, perhaps not as much, but that in the area, and I think that was to Mr. Schaefer's comment, in the area that is far more affordable than the single-family homes that exist.
Right, it might be relative, but it's still going to probably attract retirees, not nurses.
I think this council has been proactive on starting to discuss how do we provide more affordable housing. Unfortunately, I think this application may be too far along, but I would hope, and I agree with you 100%, that in the future, particularly around urban areas, that we have that discussion with applicants about providing some.
I just, they're requesting additional density. I didn't know, there was some willingness to compromise and offer something in exchange for that.
Certainly a fair question.
Again, I think the range of housing styles is how you accomplish that at this location and in this circumstance. The one thing I'm going to switch back to the DELDOT question and placing that burden on just the most recent developer, the current developer who's doing something. In that February DELDOT workshop that occurred, the cost at that time for the dualization of Kings Highway was estimated to be around $23 million. And certainly, while this site has traffic it will bring to the site, as was recognized in 2009, there have been a number of projects since then that have contributed to that. So, and that's what the MOU recognizes, is that it would be unfair to tell this developer, you're stuck with a $23 million dualization of Kings Highway when all the other projects have developed in front of that. Again, that was why the developer wanted to provide these interim improvements and keep its level of contribution to the Kings Highway project the same as it was even with the 50% increase in traffic that occurred with the prior plan. Again, that contribution is staying the same to help DELDOT in the area by that size contribution for a project that doesn't require that size contribution any longer, and with the interim improvements.
Well, I think the fact is there is a master plan for Kings Highway, so that's in place. We've seen the rollout on that. I don't know what that's going to end up looking like after public comment, but there is a master plan for Kings Highway and those improvements, and I've heard testimony that your engineer believes that it's going to substantially enhance traffic conditions. And the county really doesn't have a mechanism for master planning communities adjacent to one another that are owned by different entities, but I think one of the things that this council has done recently, and Mr. Whitehouse has suggested, is interconnectivity for bicycle, pedestrian, and vehicular traffic. And those things are all part of master planning. And I hope in the near future we figure out a way to do a more comprehensive approach to master planning subdivisions that are in the same geographical area as we do with roads. But, that was one of the questions that the city of Lewis raised. And, and again, we do have a master plan now for Kings Highway, and we have some limited master planning going on with subdivision designs, and I hope we continue to work on that and enhance that.
And just as a slight side note, but I think it goes along with what you're saying, Mr. Schaefer, to a certain extent, there is almost some type of master planning that's occurred between Kings Highway and the canal. Because, as I mentioned a moment ago, a land use principle is you put your more intense uses closer to the right of, that major arterial, and then as you move away from that, the uses become less intense. When you look up and down Kings Highway, of course, the Village Center, the Cape Henlopen Medical Center was being proposed here. The Big Oyster, all of those are along Kings Highway. And as you move away, you start with the multifamily houses, whether it's the townhouses or the moorings, which is another multifamily type use. And of course, as you move further away from that major arterial along Gills Neck Road, you get into larger lots and single-family homes, all the way over to the canal. So in some respects, there has been, while there's no master plan ordinance per se in Sussex County, this has evolved in a process that does show some of those master plan type components. And with respect to multifamily housing, we don't need to look just at Chapter 4 of the Comprehensive Plan. Chapter 8 also talks about the need for multifamily housing because the landscape of Sussex County is dominated by single-family housing. And so what is needed is more of this multifamily housing, which is what's being proffered. In fact, two of the objectives in Section 8.2 of the Comprehensive Plan talk about the county establishing ways to have more multifamily housing in locations that are appropriate, locations with utilities, locations along a major arterial, locations near an urban setting, as was suggested. As the county knows, in addition to its own land use planning tools, of course, the state has the state strategies map. And this is the 2020 state strategies map. Of course, if the rendering was not there, you would see that this property is within the middle there is red in color, which is level 1 on the state strategies map. And because it has that designation and because of its proximity to the city of Lewis, that's likely why the Office of State Planning Coordination had no objection to this project. And in fact, I wanted to read one of the first paragraphs from their letter in response to the PLUS application. It states, this project is located in investment level 1 according to the 2020 strategies for state policies and spending. Investment level 1 reflects areas that are already developed in an urban or suburban fashion, where infrastructure is existing or readily available, and where future redevelopment or infill projects are expected and encouraged by state policy. When I began some time ago now, I stated that this project was about compliance and consistency, and throughout this afternoon, as the presentation was made and as Council has obviously looked at the project booklet before based on the questions that we've received, you can see through the various reports of professionals and experts that was the guidepost for this application, from the state strategies map to the comprehensive plan to the various purposes of the zoning districts that are found within those documents. That is what was learned, or that is what is studied and then affected with these applications as they were brought to you this afternoon. At the outset, I spoke about the Mitchell family's connection, and two of them are here, and I believe one of them may speak. If you look in the materials that Mr. Whitehouse referenced at the outset, there is an email letter from Jerry Mitchell, who lives on the property. And in a moment, I'm going to hand to Mr. Whitehouse and Mr. Moore a copy of a letter from Bob Mitchell. another owner of the property. In their letter, they talk about how much pride the family has taken in its ownership of this property and the farming operations and how it has maintained this land since the 1800s. He also explains how farming is no longer a viable option for this property. And near the end, he talks about finding quality people and using the property in a way to enhance the area, as the family has done for more than a century. He describes bringing the conditional use application that resulted in Cape Henlopen Medical Center. Of course, as we discussed earlier, the family also conveyed pieces to neighboring businesses in the area and neighboring property owners, whether it was Cadbury or the Moorings, as well as Big Oyster, so that those local businesses and uses could expand and use parts of this property and put them to good use. The letter also talks about they wanted to find a quality developer to finish the development of the rest of the project. And I hope, as you saw and have seen this afternoon, there's a great deal of attention and detailed planning that has gone into this project. Whether it's, this council regularly sees professional engineers such as Mr. Lardner, traffic engineers, and geologists. The types of things that you don't often see is the cultural resource expert or the historian. Some projects have it, but they made sure that that was here as part of this. You often don't see an architectural review of an area to try to make sure that whatever is constructed in that area is done. And you also don't often have a local land planner, such as Mr. Davidson with the Pannoni Group, go out and review the project and offer constructive criticism to the developer in that process as to how best to make it fit within the comprehensive plan and the nature and character of this area. Of course, even that level of detail doesn't guarantee successful planning. After carefully laying out landscaping, and I think this is going to go to a question that Mr. Schaefer had when Mr. Lardner was talking, but after carefully proposing a wonderful, beautiful buffer along Kings Highway between this proposed project and Kings Highway, it was learned through the public hearing or the workshop that DelDOT had about the 80 feet of right-of-way that was coming from this property and then the 15 feet of permanent easement. And of course that impacted this plan immensely and means there's less opportunity to do those things. The developer had already met with the Byways Committee about this important corridor into the city of Lewis. And the developer still has reached back out to the Byways Committee and says, whatever area we have left, we want to make it look as good as we can, not only for our project, but because it is a byway headed into the city of Lewis. And in fact, the developer is working with DelDOT so that it will be first initially the developer, then of course the Property Owners Association, who maintains that right-of-way ultimately along that shared use path. Because DelDOT would probably not maintain it as they're in the business of getting people from location A to B, not in making something look as attractive as possible. And so that will be part of this, is that the developer will help to maintain that buffer area and will put as much beautification into that as is possible. Of course, another surprise in this process was the concerns and anxiety expressed by the Board of Public Works and then most recently the City of Lewis in its letter about its well fields. And what was surprising about that is certainly not the concern that anybody has for drinking water. The surprise is that there was no objection when the Cape Henlopen Medical Center application, which is certainly within this corner of that same area, when that application went through, there was no objection at that time. The other reason why it was surprising is because the county code has an entire chapter dedicated to these types of things, Chapter 89 of the code, and it describes in detail what an applicant has to do within those areas. It's not a prohibition on development. It just says you have to comply with certain features and elements. And what was reviewed by Mr. Cahill during his presentation, as well as Mr. Lardner, was that this project will readily be able to comply with that. And then in the supplemental report that you received this afternoon, It demonstrated that in addition to being able to comply with those requirements that are found in Chapter 89, there will be significant enhancement and benefits to this wellhead protection area, including the elimination of the farming soil additives that occur, using best management practices for stormwater so that stormwater ends up being treated and there's a better quality of water. And then significantly, recharging an additional 4 million gallons a year into that wellhead protection area just from that area, not even including whatever recharge occurs from outside that wellhead protection area. All of this was by design. All of these things were by design through careful planning and study. As was introduced by Mr. Whitehouse, the Planning Commission recommended approval of all 3 of these applications, with the change of zone applications receiving unanimous votes and the conditional use receiving a 3-1 vote, as Mr. Mears was absent that night. With the concern of the lone negative vote on the conditional use was largely related to the wellhead protection area. And as described a moment ago, and then of course in Mr. Cahill and Mr. Lardner's testimony, not only will this be code compliant, but there will be enhancements and benefits to the wellhead protection area. And all of that information was not in front of that Planning Commission member, as, again, after hearing those concerns, we went out and decided and put together the supplemental report to provide the council with additional information. One other housekeeping item, the conditional use, as was recommended for approval by the Planning Commission, had 18 conditions, and they're labeled A through R. Many of those were proffered by the applicant, but one of those that was proffered by the applicant and then modified by the Planning Commission is Condition K. And Condition K relates to construction, site work, and deliveries. The developer's proffer to the Planning Commission was that those activities, construction, site work, and such, occur Monday through Saturday from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. With no Sunday hours. The Planning Commission recommended no Saturday hours, so it was only Monday through Friday from 7 to 6. And what the developer would propose and ask council to modify of that condition is that there be Saturday hours that match DelDOT's time frame for construction in the coastal areas of Sussex County. So from October 1st through April 30th, Saturday construction and site work services and deliveries could occur. And then between May 1st and September 30th, then the prohibition on any activity would occur. And I'll provide Mr. Moore with a markup of that he can circulate along with Mr. Bob Mitchell's letter of support for ease of reference.
And those seasonal deliveries on Saturday are 7 a.m. to
6 p.m.
6 p.m.
That's correct. And that, again, as I mentioned, that matches DelDOT. DelDOT doesn't have construction in the coastal areas during those same time periods, so essentially would match that. Mr. Moore, do you want these, or you want me to give them to Mr. Whitehouse?
Are you referring to the proposed markup?
Yes.
I would like a proposed markup, please. Thank you.
In addition to the proposed markup, there is the letter from Bob Mitchell, one of the Mitchell family members. You'll be ecstatic to hear this, but that concludes my presentation. And certainly, if you have any questions, myself and all the other members of our team that are here are happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Any questions?
I just want to make a statement. I actually, I don't know whether I should say this out loud, but I actually had this City of Lewis letter last night.
There you go.
And I think we've gone through it and answered all their questions. If there's anybody in opposition that disagrees with your answers to the questions, I'll ask them the same questions I asked you, just for make sure everybody's on the same page. But I did want to make it clear that we made a yeoman's effort to answer the questions in the City of Lewis letter. I think it's very important that we pay attention to their concerns and advocate on their behalf.
And to that extent, Council may have noticed, I did not have the benefit of having that letter last night, but Ms. Torberg did hand it to me. Mr. Whitehouse had her hand me a copy of it during the presentation, so we've been reading it and attempting to answer those questions as we went through it as well. Mr.
Well, I
Chairman.
think we went through it pretty thoroughly, so.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. If there are no other questions, Mr. Hutt, I can say you're honest in that you told us that it would be much longer than the last one. Do you have anything else to add at this time, Mr. Hutt?
I do not, thank you.
Okay. Is there anyone here today that would like to speak in favor of this application? Anyone else in the room that'd like to speak? Yes.
I'll be more brief than Mr. Hutt. Good afternoon. I'm Robert Mitchell, Mitchell Family Partnership. Just like to say that our family has owned and been in control of this parcel of ground for, I'm told now, 7 generations. We do have some roots there. When it came time to take the decision to sell this parcel, it was quite a family discussion. We don't take it lightly. We have been involved in the community around us, contributed, been members of the charitable groups and civic organizations and churches and so forth. Hopefully made positive contributions to this area, and it's our home. When we decided to sell, we recognized that we had an obligation to make sure that, to the best of our ability, that we chose wisely in what we wanted to do. We wanted to make sure it contributed and benefited our neighbors in the community. And I can tell you, we were blessed and fortunate to encounter Henlopen Properties as a purchaser and developer of this area. I have worked with them. They have been a fantastic and outstanding group to work with. Their goals and their concern about the quality of life issues that we had and conveyed to them, they have answered and just have been fantastic to work with. And we're very comfortable leaving this entrusted to them. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak in favor